On November 12, 1943, inside a tight confines of an office in Berlin's Bendler block, the headquarters at 76 Tietzufa served as the hub for German military intelligence activities. There, two of the regime's top experts in analysis were on the verge of uncovering a revelation that would dismantle every notion the Nazi leadership clung to regarding their adversary. Across the desk from Colonel Reinhard Gahlen, who oversaw Foreign Armies East, was his equivalent, Colonel Alexis von Ruroena, Director of Foreign Armies West. Each had ascended to their roles via proven expertise in dissection and scrupulous scrutiny. For years, they had monitored foe strengths with clinical accuracy, yet now they faced paperwork that promised devastation beyond any lost engagement on the front lines. Resting between them was a pile of seemingly ordinary sheets, routine U.S. Army supply logs seized amid latest actions in Italy. These were drab administrative records packed with tables of data on goods shipped, used, and requested. Their plain look gave no hint of the data proving Germany's triumph mathematically unfeasible. Still, the figures embedded within painted a picture of manufacturing might so vast that the pair had devoted the prior 7 days to verifying references, recalculating sums, and hunting for flaws to soften the dire outlook. Von Ruroena's fingers shook faintly as he slid the uppermost sheet forward. It consisted of a basic order for provisions from the U.S. Fifth Army in Italy, detailing aims for shipments to just one corps active in that campaign over a month, bearing official stamps, a date, and signatures from several supply personnel. Its legitimacy was beyond doubt. Galen examined the stats wordlessly, his complexion draining as he grasped their meaning. The U.S. forces were supplying a single unit with more shells in 30 days than the whole Wehrmacht got for the Eastern Front in that span. Raising his eyes to von Ruroena, he scanned for signs of mistake or trickery in his peers' features. But von Ruroena's look provided no solace. He had already run identical math, arrived at identical findings, and endured 3 nights without rest, praying for a different outcome. "This can't possibly be right," Galen murmured softly, his voice lacking any real assurance. It wasn't an assertion of fact, merely a plea, a fervent desire that the proof might reveal a milder fate. Von Ruroena drew forth another file from the heap. "I felt the identical doubt. Here's a record of petroleum shipments to that same unit for 1 month's activity. They got 3.22 million gallons of petrol and 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel." He halted, allowing the scale to sink in. "When I stacked it against our distribution, Army Group Center, commanding 3 armies and more than 500,000 troops, ends up with less in a month than this lone American corps." Over the preceding week, the officers had immersed themselves in such contrasts, aligning seized U.S. files against Reich supply summaries, POW questionings against flight surveys, spy dispatches from non-belligerent states against exams of taken gear. All channels upheld the same inconceivable fact. The United States wasn't merely surpassing German output. They functioned at a magnitude beyond grasp, rendering the Reich's output as if from an earlier age. The data narrated a tale impervious to valor, strategic genius, or fanatic zeal. The Third Reich battled not just enemies, but numbers, and numbers prevail every time. The path to this harsh enlightenment had started several months prior, though its origins traced years back to core errors engaging U.S. manufacturing prowess. Nazi spy networks had followed coalition production since pre-conflict days, gathering intel on plant sites, output potentials, and material stocks. However, they repeatedly misjudged catastrophically the feats America could pull off at peak effort. This stemmed not from simple blunders. The biases woven into Axis planning, influenced by racial doctrines and the Reich's manufacturing history, rendered U.S. might appear implausible, almost mythical. The fatherland's combat-era realities tinted all their views on output. By 1943, the nation had harnessed every resource at hand, plundered subjugated lands for essentials and tools, deployed vast forced labor systems, and driven factories to apparent extremes. Plants ran non-stop. Laborers endured prolonged hours. Output of arms, shells, and munitions had surged far above 1939 marks. The Reich churned out vehicles, planes, and guns at paces unimaginable back then. Yet, even with this all-out effort, even after seizing much of Europe and draining its assets, even amid the frantic ramp-up of output led by Albert Speer, Germany was falling behind in the battle for resources. The core German error took shape long before any gunfire erupted. Back in May 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt addressed Congress, declaring that the United States would manufacture 50,000 planes each year as a cornerstone of its sweeping military buildup. In the ensuing period, he broadened this plan dramatically. The target swelled to 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 armored vehicles, 55,000 anti-aircraft cannons, and 18 million tons of commercial vessels, all within a mere 2 years. These staggering stats reached Berlin via various spy networks. When shared with Hitler and his inner circle, the German brass brushed them off with scorn. Such figures, they decided, were pure Yankee hype, meant to cow Germany and lift spirits among the Allies. This view appeared perfectly logical given the evidence at hand. Back in 1939, U.S. output of warplanes barely topped 2,999 per year. The American ground forces placed 18th globally in strength, outmatched even by Portugal's. U.S. tanks were outdated relics, sparse in supply. Though the American fleet was impressive, it split duties across 2 vast seas, prioritizing shoreline protection over offensive strikes. How might a country with such modest armed forces explode its output by a factor of 60 in only 2 years? It clashed with every lesson from German industrial scaling. Erecting plants demanded years, schooling personnel ate up months, refining assembly methods involved endless testing. Roosevelt's bold claim struck many as the wild dream of a cornered leader, not a feasible goal. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, who commanded the Luftwaffe and ranked among Hitler's most trusted confidants, allegedly chuckled upon learning of it. Though this tale draws from later accounts rather than fresh German records, several scholars quote Göring as mocking that Americans excelled only at churning out fridges and shavers, utterly incapable of forging the weaponry needed to topple Germany. Regardless of the precise wording, the underlying attitude rang true. The German elite truly saw U.S. manufacturing prowess as mismatched for wartime demands. This judgment aligned with what they could see. The United States dominated in everyday items, cars, home gadgets, the like. Yet arms manufacturing called for specialized skills, unique setups, and fresh technical strategies. German factories had geared up for conflict since 1933. Could U.S. makers of civilian products possibly rival that dedicated war machine? The Germans overlooked a key truth about American manufacturing might that ultimately tipped the scales. The Great Depression had left vast swaths of U.S. industry dormant. Plants stood vacant or half-empty. Countless expert laborers lingered jobless or in dead-end roles. Precision tools for crafting auto parts, farm gear, or kitchenwares lay unused or throttled back. What passed for frailty was in fact a huge, untapped stockpile ready for the switch. When Roosevelt urged a shift to defense, he wasn't urging a total overhaul from zero. Instead, he sought to repurpose standing facilities, recall furloughed staff, and repoint reliable pre-existing equipment. The backbone for wartime expansion was already in place, needing just a pivot, not invention from scratch. Germany lacked any such buffer. By 1940, its economy hummed near its limits. The Nazis had poured into rearmament non-stop since 1933, inflating arms output annually. Spare slots were scarce, skilled hands fully employed, equipment maximally engaged. Any growth had to rely on fresh builds, seized lands factories, or coerced workers, options that dragged on for years and hit hard ceilings. This stark contrast in baselines, America's dormant power against Germany's maxed-out grind, let the U.S. surge ahead at breakneck speed from a much grander foundation. Germany's spy outfits, especially Foreign Armies West under Colonel von Roena, bore the duty of monitoring enemy strengths. Von Roena hailed from a noble Prussian soldier dynasty, with kin serving the fatherland across centuries. He personified the disciplined Prussian command cadre, systematic, precise, devoted to unbiased evaluation. His unit drew data from diverse channels, including Luftwaffe. German intelligence relied on aerial surveillance missions, intercepted radio signals, insights from spy rings in neutral territories, thorough debriefings of POWs, and paperwork seized amid combat actions. During 1941 and 1942, even as the United States joined the conflict and ramped up its preparations, the data flowing to Berlin stayed patchy and perplexing. Accounts of U.S. manufacturing prowess fluctuated dramatically based on the origin and approach of the information. Certain dispatches pointed to enormous surges in manufacturing, plants operating round the clock, and assembly lines churning out tens of thousands of planes. Others portrayed ongoing financial woes, worker conflicts, sloppy assembly techniques, and subpar gear. The German leadership opted for the reassuring evaluations, those that matched their notions of U.S. frailty. Such cherry-picking of intel wasn't exclusive to the Nazis. Every armed force has a habit of embracing details that reinforce preconceived ideas while sidelining evidence that upends foundational views. Yet for Germany, this mental shortcut would lead to disaster. In 1941 and the start of 1942, after all, the Wehrmacht dominated the battlefield. It had overrun Poland in mere weeks, toppled France in just 6 weeks, and seized Yugoslavia in 11 days. Nazi troops controlled Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, much of France, and vast swaths of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe had established itself as the globe's premier aerial power. German armor and battlefield strategies outclassed anything rivals could muster. U-boats were torpedoing Allied vessels at a pace exceeding replacement rates, at least according to Berlin's calculations. What reason did German bosses have to dread a country untested in big conflicts since 1918, with a minuscule military, outdated tanks and factories geared more for civilian products than war machines? This smug confidence started to fracture in North Africa following the U.S. invasion via Operation Torch on November 8, 1942. Nazi officers anticipated clashing with green soldiers wielding faulty tools, easily routed and driven into the Mediterranean. Instead, they met an entirely different reality. Sure, the Yanks lacked battle-hardened expertise, a point that held true. Initial clashes, especially the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, brought crushing U.S. losses. Wehrmacht squads pushed American outfits rearward by more than 50 miles, slain over 1,000 GIs, nabbed hordes of captives, and confiscated heaps of hardware. The Germans' edge in maneuvers shone through unmistakably. Still, seasoned Nazi leaders sensed unease about the opponent's setup. The volume of their material was jaw-dropping and without precedent. U.S. outfits hammered in fights bounced back with full replenishments in mere days, or even hours. Trucks, firearms, rounds, and provisions poured in without apparent limit. Victorious German detachments couldn't capitalize on successes since American supply chains just soaked up the hits and pressed on relentlessly. Looted U.S. depots brimmed with supplies dwarfing what whole German army groups held. Yankee guns unleashed shells at volumes the Wehrmacht could scarcely imagine. American foot soldiers rode in vehicles to an extent the Nazis' crack units had never matched. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, overseeing Axis troops in North Africa from February 1941 right up to his pullout to the homeland on March 9, 1943, dispatched ever more urgent warnings to Berlin. Every U.S. infantry division, he observed, boasted more haulers than a full German corps. American transport outfits managed truck convoys bigger than those for entire Nazi field armies. Stockpiles overrun in Wehrmacht, pushes overflowed with rations, petrol, munitions, replacement components, bandages, and tools in amounts that struck Germans as excessive, almost indecent. Rommel, famed for his strategic genius, grasped that combat tricks lost meaning against such overwhelming bounty. He pushed for a full retreat from North Africa, contending that enemy sky and sea dominance, paired with boundless sustainment, guaranteed Axis downfall no matter the ground gains. These alerts got recorded, archived, and mostly brushed aside by Berlin's top brass. Rommel had a rep for gloominess, for constantly demanding extra assets, for highlighting hurdles instead of openings. His gripes got waved off as typical brass bellyaching, the standard habit of on-site bosses to inflate foe, might and downplay their side's prowess. The Führer himself shot down Rommel's views, maintaining that grit and maneuver mastery would trump any edge in numbers. Hitler's perspective simply couldn't square with the idea that factory output might outweigh ideology in the end. It wasn't merely a matter of ideological fervor or battlefield prowess, yet the intelligence experts struggled to overlook the evidence unfolding before them. As 1943 progressed and the conflict shifted sharply in Germany's disfavor across various theaters, the influx of alarming intelligence surged dramatically. Following the capitulation of Axis troops in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, German interrogators systematically questioned around 125,000 detained German troops from the overall 250,000 to 275,000 Axis captives. Working from standardized forms crafted by the espionage branches, these evaluation units probed beyond mere combat specifics to uncover wider trends in Allied, especially U.S., military prowess. The narratives shared by these detainees showed striking uniformity, regardless of their positions, divisions, or combat histories. Each one highlighted the lavish American logistics that struck Germans as profligate. They detailed how full rations got discarded simply because the flavor didn't appeal. They explained abandoning U.S. transport after slight breakdowns, opting instead to request fresh units over fixing the damaged ones. They depicted vast stockpiles dwarfing any in the Wehrmacht, brimming with provisions, munitions, petroleum, and gear in seemingly boundless amounts. Pharmaceuticals abounded, featuring sulfa medications that were growing rare back home. Detainees even noted receiving superior meals as prisoners of war compared to their frontline diets. Certain tales appeared so outlandish at first that the questioners wondered about embellishment or enemy misinformation. However, the uniformity spanning countless separate sessions rendered such doubts untenable. From commanders to privates, airborne specialists to foot soldiers, armored operators to gunners, everyone relayed identical tales of America's crushing logistical edge. Even more tellingly, these reports aligned with encounters by German units elsewhere. In Sicily, seized during July and August 1943, similar observations emerged. The pattern recurred in Italy after the Allied landings in September 1943. Wherever Germans clashed with U.S. forces, they met foes backed by inexhaustible resources. Although these detainee testimonies raised alarms, they might have been brushed off as biased views inflated by routed troops rationalizing defeat. That changed as seized papers started flooding into Berlin in larger volumes, materials too objective to ignore. Unlike personal recollections, these logistics records were dry, administrative, irrefutable. Designed for no dramatic effect, they represented everyday bureaucratic records charting the flow of goods via the U.S. supply chain. Yet the figures within them spelled catastrophe for German operational strategy. A standout item, a periodical logistics summary from a U.S. Army Corps active in Italy that fall, offered stark clarity. Authenticated and endorsed by various supply officials, it detailed shipments and usage for the period. Centered on roughly 80,000 personnel, akin in scale to a German Army Corps, the parallels stopped abruptly. That U.S. Corps had taken in 3.2 million gallons of petrol and 800,000 gallons of diesel over the month. Colonel Galland juxtaposed this against fuel rations for Wehrmacht elements on the Eastern Front, where Army Group Center, encompassing numerous corps and hundreds of thousands of troops, got less overall petroleum in a month than this lone American outfit. The gap wasn't slight, it marked a fundamental divergence in capacity. The munitions data in the document proved even more crushing. That U.S. Corps had acquired 15,000 tons of shellfire ordnance in the month, while a German counterpart might manage 2,000 tons in the same time frame, and view that as sufficient. The Americans unleashed barrages at sevenfold the German tempo, and vitally, they could sustain it without strain. This wasn't a surge for an impending assault with stockpiles funneled temporarily. It reflected standard protocol, the everyday resupply for ongoing duties. The consequences boggled the mind. U.S. guns could deliver suppressive fire that would deplete German reserves in mere days, persisting without end. The equipment replenishment stats painted a similarly grim picture. In a single month of standard engagements, not epic clashes, merely routine maneuvers, the American Corps had obtained 847 trucks, 127 jeeps, 43 tanks, and 68 artillery units to offset battle damage and breakdowns. These weren't expansions to bolster forces, they merely restored preset inventories. The entire German military had drawn fewer armored vehicles from nationwide output in the prior month than this one U.S. Corps claimed as everyday substitutes. The numerical ramifications. The sheer volume of American supply replenishments was impossible to ignore. Should the United States sustain such replacement rates for a single Corps unit, and with scores of these units active in various battlefronts, their overall logistical prowess dwarfed German manufacturing output by several magnitudes. Colonel von Roena examined these seized papers with the rigorous accuracy that had earned him renown among Germany's top intelligence experts. Hailing from a lineage steeped in Prussian martial heritage, he was nonetheless a skilled evaluator, schooled in impartial assessment of facts irrespective of his own inclinations. These intercepted U.S. records offered concrete metrics ripe for measurement, cross-referencing, and dissection. He started methodically computing. Assuming one U.S. Corps demanded resources at this pace, and given that the nation had stationed dozens of them throughout the Mediterranean, Pacific, and in readiness for Western European campaigns, the aggregate U.S. supply network surpassed any scale Germany could rival or conceive. Von Roena called for further details on U.S. industrial output from every accessible channel. Over the ensuing weeks, the gathered material drew from diverse, unrelated origins. Operative dispatches from Switzerland and Sweden, where German spy operations endured, import-export data from neutral nations scrutinized for trends, instruction booklets seized alongside U.S. gear, bearing maker info and sequence codes, breakdowns of sequential markings on taken vehicles and arms, enabling output projections, and publicly available insights from U.S. periodicals and journals detailing plant growth and manufacturing milestones. Every avenue carried risks of inaccuracy or bias. Yet when varied, standalone inputs aligned on the core narrative, the inferences turned irrefutable. The U.S. armored vehicle output saga stood out as especially stark and troubling. In 1941, the United States manufactured around 4,021 tanks, a tally German spies had noted and dismissed as modest, since Germany outpaced it. Such a judgment appeared sound at the time. The U.S. evidently lagged in armament buildup, aligning with forecasts. However, by 1942, American tank numbers climbed to 26.8 units, marking over a six-fold surge within 1 year. German analysts at first chalked this up to exaggeration or the lumping in of all armored types, armed or not. Yet, examinations of seized hardware, POW questionings, and field agent confirmations validated the counts. Then, 1943 delivered data even more staggering. U.S. tank output hit 37,298 units, the zenith of their wartime armored production. In comparison, Germany managed about 5,530 tanks in 1942 and roughly 11,600 in 1943. These German totals signaled major gains from earlier peacetime levels, demanding vast commitments like facility enlargements, non-stop work hours, and optimized assembly lines. The Reich's factories ran at full enduring throttle, and churning out 11,600 tanks annually counted as a notable triumph. Still, the Americans were forging over 3 tanks per German one, and the divide was growing, not shrinking. Even more unsettling, U.S. output kept ramping up as German efforts faltered amid Allied air raids and material deficits. Stats on airplane manufacturing revealed an even greater imbalance and urgency. According to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's review of seized German ledgers, the Reich built about 15,096 warplanes in 1942, a jump from prior periods that Luftwaffe commanders hailed as evidence of robust factory might and wartime ramp-up. Frontline squadrons gained plentiful new interceptors and heavy bombers, but U.S. output that year soared to 47,136 aircraft, over triple the German tally. When German intel first saw these stats, they pegged them as hype or padded with trainers, sailplanes, and utility craft. Close scrutiny, however, showed they covered frontline planes akin to German models. The chasm expanded in 1943. American factories delivered 85 A198 aircraft, while Germany, pushing hard for gains, hit around 2,600. The U.S. was outproducing Germany by more than 4-1. By 1944, American numbers peaked at 96,000 aircraft as German output topped out near 39,087 before dropping sharply from Allied assaults. Ultimately, the United States would assemble some 300,000 317 military aircraft across the conflict, surpassing even Roosevelt's bold 1940 goals. Allied command of the heavens stemmed not just from aviator prowess or plane superiority, vital as those were, but because American factories were outpacing the rate at which German pilots could destroy aircraft, and their own plants could replenish the destroyed ones. However, the most crushing contrast emerged in the realm of merchant vessels as it struck at the heart of Germany's maritime doctrine. The Germans recognized that in a worldwide conflict, supply chains relied heavily on sea transport. The Atlantic served as the pivotal theater where U-boats aimed to disrupt the vital connections between the United States and the United Kingdom. Should Germany manage to destroy vessels quicker than they could be constructed, the Allies' supply network would crumble, leaving Britain vulnerable to famine and rendering U.S. manufacturing dominance useless since supplies couldn't arrive at the combat zones. The U-boat offensive represented Berlin's counter to Washington's output prowess. Eliminate the carriers, and output figures lose all significance. German analysts monitored Allied vessel casualties with precision. During 1942, U-boats notched their peak achievement, dispatching 1,322 Allied ships amounting to 6.3 million tons. This looked like a crippling blow, marking the war's record yearly toll. It appeared the Allies couldn't endure such attrition forever. The Atlantic struggle seemed to swing in Germany's favor. U-boat leaders were hailed as national icons, their triumphs splashed across Nazi media. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who oversaw the U-boat armada, boldly forecasted that ongoing destruction paces would compel an Allied capitulation prior to U.S. factory output tipping the scales. Nevertheless, even amid these enormous setbacks, Allied merchant tonnage grew steadily through 1942. What explained this feat? The secret rested in U.S. shipbuilding prowess that shattered every German notion of manufacturing efficiency. Intercepted files and spy dispatches increasingly mentioned Liberty ships, a uniform freighter model that U.S. docks were churning out at unprecedented speeds. At first, German spies rejected tales of Liberty ship output as blatant exaggeration, far too implausible to accept. The assertions indicated that American yards were assembling these 10,000-ton freighters in roughly 42 days from keel laying to commissioning. A few were said to take under 2 weeks. This defied all fundamentals of naval engineering as understood by German experts. Building ships was a deliberate, drawn-out endeavor spanning months or even years. Every hull was largely bespoke, with countless components crafted and fitted by expert artisans. Just the welding for a 10,000-ton behemoth demanded weeks of labor. Notions of completion in fewer than 6 weeks contravened core shipbuilding tenets. Still, POW accounts repeatedly described spotting scores of Liberty ships docked in U.S. harbors. Seized papers listed Liberty ship identifiers numbering in the thousands. Though restricted, Luftwaffe aerial surveys of U.S. shorelines captured images of yards brimming with uniform hulls at diverse completion phases. Spies in neutral nations verified the vast U.S. naval expansion. Dönitz sought a specialist review from naval intelligence, urging evaluators to determine if the cited Liberty ship tempos were conceivable in theory. The verdict affirmed the unbelievable. U.S. facilities were genuinely delivering Liberty ships at those velocities via innovative building approaches. Rather than relying on time-honored riveting, they integrated welding comprehensively, accelerating the work albeit with novel expertise needs. Departing from the conventional bottom-up progression, they pre-manufactured full modules concurrently. Forward compartments, aft portions, upper decks, propulsion bays, all fabricated at once across yard zones, then joined like gigantic puzzle pieces. They adapted conveyor belt methods unprecedented in maritime work, borrowing from car assembly lines. Specialized Liberty yards sprang up anew, fine-tuning the entire workflow for velocity. Thousands of novices, including many women, received instruction in advanced welding and assembly skills. The outcomes proved astonishing. At maximum output, U.S. operations finished 3 Liberty ships daily. Just in 1943, America debuted 19.32 million tons of merchant craft, outstripping U-boat sinkings of 2.6 million tons by over 7-fold. The U.S. was fabricating ships more than 7 times swifter than Germany could eliminate them. Single Liberty vessels might fall to torpedoes, specific convoys could face assaults, yet the aggregate equation spelled ruin for German planning. Regardless of U-boat breakthroughs or every sortie yielding several kills, American fabrication would surpass destructions by vast multiples. The Atlantic campaign was slipping away not due to shortcomings in U-boat maneuvers or crew courage. Alone couldn't suffice. Basic calculations revealed the truth. Germany simply lacked the capacity to submerge vessels quickly enough to halt the flood of American manufacturing might pouring into Europe. 2 particular Liberty ships exemplified U.S. productive prowess with striking precision: the SS Robert E. Perry came together in just 4 days and 15.5 hours during November 1942, from keel laying to launch. Meanwhile, the SS Joseph N. Thiel took shape in 10 days back in September 1942. German naval intelligence experts, upon examining these accounts, first dismissed them as exaggerated propaganda, yet various corroborating reports verified the ship's existence and the timeline's validity. The Maritime Commission itself admitted these were exceptional motivational projects crafted for promotional purposes, relying heavily on pre-keel prefabrication and post-launch outfitting. Such record-breaking feats weren't replicated in standard operations due to their impracticality for ongoing output. Nevertheless, even factoring in these qualifications, the ability of American shipyards to assemble seaworthy freighters in mere days instead of months highlighted an industrial might that Germany couldn't rival. These insights piled up through 1943, striking like repeated impacts on German tactical strategies. Every fresh report reinforced and intensified the image of America's dominant manufacturing edge. Colonel Galen, tasked mainly with Eastern Front matters, started scrutinizing U.S. industrial setups via accessible materials, including technical journals, pre-war economic analyses, and public data from U.S. media and industry magazines. His discoveries illuminated the mechanics behind this output, but rendered Germany's position even more dire. The core imbalance was staggering. The U.S. commanded about 41% of global industrial output. Pre-war evaluations indicated that Germany, despite seizing much of Europe and tapping resources from France, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and other subjugated areas, held roughly 12% of worldwide capacity. Yet raw figures captured only a fraction of the narrative. U.S. manufacturing excelled in magnitude and streamlined operations that outpaced German efforts even at full theoretical capacity. These disparities stemmed from deep-rooted systems and designs, beyond mere diligence or management. A seized U.S. guidebook on tank fabrication offered key revelations to German evaluators seeking to grasp America's expansive scale. Aimed at plant managers and overseers, it outlined procedures at Chrysler's Detroit tank plant. This site, with 10,000 employees, churned out M4 Sherman medium tanks via assembly lines modeled on car production techniques. At its height, this one operation delivered 896 tanks in December 1942, maintaining 600 to 800 units monthly thereafter. In contrast, Germany's dispersed tank sector in early 1943, relying on expert artisans and conventional approaches across numerous sites, managed only around 600 tanks per month overall. Thus, a lone American plant matched the nation's complete armored vehicle yield, and this represented merely one among several U.S. tank factories. The guidebook exposed techniques that German operations had never scaled to this degree. Tanks progressed along lines akin to cars. Component sections were handled concurrently. Hulls in one zone, turrets elsewhere, powertrains in dedicated areas, then integrated for completion. Laborers focused on narrow roles instead of artisans crafting full parts. Custom tools and molds guaranteed seamless joins without expert tweaks. Standardized elements allowed mass fabrication and straightforward integration, free of bespoke alterations. Inspection relied on probabilistic checks over per-item reviews. The system prioritized high-volume throughput, sacrificing adaptability, personalization, or artisanal finesse. German tank making, on the other hand, clung to craft-like traits. Trained specialists aligned pieces with on-site modifications for exact matches. Specifications were stricter, surface finishes superior, and personal skill more apparent. In numerous respects, German tanks outperformed as engineered items: thicker plating, stronger armaments, advanced mechanics. The Panther and Tiger models posed genuine threats that Allied crews rightly dreaded, yet Germany managed just one Panther for every 15 Shermans produced by America. Numerical facts rendered qualitative edges moot in strategy. One Tiger might take out 5 Shermans in battle, but with 15 Shermans arrayed against it, the Tiger would inevitably succumb. The Germans realized that America managed several tank manufacturing initiatives concurrently across various plants, managed by firms specializing in diverse fields. The M4 Sherman, for instance, rolled off assembly lines at 11 separate sites run by auto giants such as Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors, as well as farm machinery producers like Allis-Chalmers and railroad locomotive constructors including Baldwin and Lima. None of these outfits had prior experience crafting tanks, yet they leveraged their established production skills effectively. Assembly line methods borrowed from car factories, robust component assembly from equipment firms, and extensive welding plus metal fabrication from train makers were all redirected toward wartime armor with remarkable efficiency. This spread-out approach to manufacturing offered a durability that Germany's concentrated system simply couldn't rival. Should a single Sherman plant face bombing or setbacks, the other 10 kept churning out vehicles unabated. Overall output remained remarkably steady. In contrast, Germany's more focused industrial setup proved far more susceptible to interruptions. A well-executed airstrike on a key site could cripple the country's entire output. The U.S. decentralized strategy wasn't only more efficient, but also tougher to sabotage, better at withstanding shocks, and quicker to scale up by activating extra plants. Firearm output displayed a comparable edge in U.S. dominance. In 1943, Germany churned out about 11,000 artillery units of every variety: howitzers, field pieces, anti-tank weapons, and anti-aircraft systems, marking the peak of what its factories and conquered lands could achieve. This total encompassed every possible workshop pressed into service for guns. The United States, meanwhile, manufactured around 43,000 artillery pieces that year, close to fourfold the German total, even as it shipped thousands more to Britain, the Soviet Union, and fellow allies via Lend-Lease aid. Frontline German troops remarked on the crushing weight of U.S. artillery barrages, not stemming from any edge in technology. German designs were frequently better engineered, but purely from sheer quantity. U.S. gun crews unleashed barrages that burned through shells in mere hours, outpacing the weekly allotments for German batteries. This stemmed not from superior tactics or aiming systems, but from raw industrial might converted into on-the-ground destructive power. Vehicle output highlighted perhaps the sharpest and most tactically vital gap in manufacturing prowess between the U.S. and Germany. Contemporary warfare hinges on mobility. Forces advance via roads and tracks. Provisions need hauling from docks or depots to combat zones. Casualties require swift removal. Soldiers must shift to hotspots. Guns demand setup and relocation. Ultimately, success in fluid battles rests on logistical transport, which in turn relies on trucks. The Wehrmacht stayed partly reliant on horsepower right through the conflict, with hundreds of thousands of animals hauling cannons, goods, and gear. This wasn't some nostalgic nod to old ways or fondness for equestrian transport. It boiled down to a shortage of engines. Germany built roughly 100,000 trucks in 1943, enough to cover both armed forces and vital domestic demands. The Wehrmacht never fully motorized its ranks. Standard infantry outfits usually towed their big guns and loads with beasts of burden. Resupply trains leaned on animal-pulled carts. Just top-tier units such as panzer groups enjoyed full truck support, and even they frequently ran short on rides. The U.S., by comparison, assembled about 620,000 trucks that year, nearly all destined for the troops. Through Lend-Lease, America sent 427,284 trucks to the Soviets over the course of the war, exceeding Germany's cumulative truck output for every use across the whole fight. Each U.S. infantry division boasted more built-in haulage than a typical German panzer outfit. American logistics teams commanded truck pools bigger than those for full German field armies. Such a chasm in haulage strength yielded clear, quantifiable effects on the front lines, effects that Wehrmacht leaders watched unfold with growing dread. U.S. troops stockpiled resources for attacks at paces Germans couldn't hope to equal. As American formations pushed forward, they sustained their pipelines via huge trucking operations that kept delivering gasoline, rounds, rations, and replacements non-stop. The Red Ball Express, launched post-Normandy to feed the surging Allied push, showcased U.S. supply prowess in action. At its height, it mobilized 5,958 trucks in non-stop columns along exclusive single-direction routes. The peak daily haul hit 12,342 tons on August 29, 1944, with reliable ongoing averages. During peak times, the Red Ball Express operation delivered up to 12,500 tons of supplies each day. This one logistical effort transported more goods daily than the full German military in Western Europe obtained from every possible channel. Through intelligence assessments, German leaders recognized they were seeing a logistical feat without parallel in the annals of warfare. Remarkably, the Red Ball Express wasn't even the main U.S. supply network. It served as a hasty improvisation after swift battlefield gains left standard resupply routes behind. Even so, this improvised setup surpassed the overall logistical reach of the Germans. When the Germans tried to run comparable convoy missions, they grappled with fuel deficits, mechanical failures, strikes from Allied aircraft, and coordination issues. U.S. convoys, however, kept rolling non-stop in the face of identical hurdles. They simply powered through difficulties via immense volume. If a single vehicle failed, a replacement stepped in immediately. If an assault hit one group, the next one pressed on without pause. Such vast material dominance turned operational hurdles into trivial annoyances, not barriers that could not be crossed. Intelligence from seized papers also exposed the scale of the American oil sector, which hit German planners with profound implications. Fuel scarcity had plagued Germany right from the war's outset. With minimal homegrown oil resources, the country turned to coal-based synthetic fuels via the Fischer-Tropsch method and shipments from Romania's fields. The synthetic initiative demanded huge industrial commitments, devouring vast amounts of materials and energy to convert coal into petrol and diesel. Those Romanian deliveries hinged on securing the Balkans and safeguarding transport routes. Thus, German campaigns were always limited by petroleum supplies. Choices on timing and location for assaults frequently hinged more on fuel reserves than on battlefield prospects. The 1942 push by Germany toward the Caucasus was driven chiefly by the urgency to seize Russian oil reserves rather than goals of land control or better positioning. In stark contrast, U.S. troops faced zero such petroleum restrictions. Documents from captures indicated that American outfits in Italy got fuel allotments surpassing their highest conceivable usage. They had surplus fuel beyond what they could possibly burn. Certain vehicles ran for drills, upkeep, or hauling small loads, tasks that German troops might have handled manually or skipped entirely. Analysis of intelligence clarified the roots of this plenty. In 1943, U.S. oil output hit about 1.4 billion barrels, accounting for around two-thirds of global totals. The United States outproduced every other country put together. Germany, blending synthetic output with Romanian imports, managed maybe 40 to 50 million barrels per year, under 4% of America's yield. U.S. frontline resupply featured fuel storage sites and fuel trucks in numbers that topped Germany's entire national petroleum reserves. Some seized files mentioned using fuel for warming structures, powering generators for unnecessary tasks, or driving vehicles on leisure outings. Squandering petroleum on what German units would view as reckless extravagance was standard practice for Americans. In the Ardennes offensive, German strategy openly relied on seizing U.S. fuel dumps, as the Wehrmacht lacked the means to fuel the push via its own supply chains. This reliance on plundering foe resources exposed the depths of German supply frailties and tactical hopelessness. Figures for steel output reinforced all other manufacturing disparities, since steel underpins mechanized conflict. Armaments, machinery, vessels, facilities, equipment, everything in modern war demands steel. In a factory-driven struggle, output limits boil down to steel supply. In 1943, Germany churned out roughly 30 million tons of steel, hitting peak from its factories alongside seized European mills. That total encompassed production from mills in occupied France, Belgium, and Czechoslovakia, run under German oversight. It reflected full-scale commitment of all steelmaking assets at hand. The United States, meanwhile, generated 81 million tons that year. America forged almost 3 tons for each one made by Germany. The Soviet Union, even after huge factory relocations and Nazi ravaging of its Western industries, still managed about 18 million tons. Allied steel totals neared 150 million tons against Germany's 30 million, a 5-to-1 edge that flowed straight into armaments. Greater steel yields brought more armored vehicles, more naval craft, more guns, more transports, more planes, more shells, more of all the essentials for total war. This chasm in steel capacity was an unbridgeable divide. Germany's downfall stemmed not from inferior strategies, enhanced preparation, or weaker resolve, but from a core shortage of resources that capped its wartime output at unsustainable levels. The nation waged conflict across 5 theaters: Western Europe, the Eastern Front, Italy, the skies above its homeland, and the Atlantic seas, all while generating only 1/5 the steel of its collective foes. The equation of loss was etched in those stark production stats. In the waning months of 1943, Colonels Gallen and von Roene devoted weeks to scrutinizing these numbers with mounting alarm, verifying references, and hunting for inaccuracies or inflations that could soften the grim outlook. None emerged. All accounts reinforced the unyielding truth. They enlisted additional experts from Foreign Armies East and Foreign Armies West, presented the evidence, and solicited fresh evaluations. Results mirrored one another consistently. The United States wielded manufacturing might that rendered German efforts akin to artisanal workshops. The Soviet Union, enduring vast casualties and enemy seizure of key industrial zones, had deftly relocated and reconstructed facilities, surpassing Germany's total yield. Britain, despite its modest scale, sustained output to equip a contemporary force and deliver cutting-edge innovations such as radar systems, jet propulsion, and code deciphering devices, fields where Germany labored to compete. Confronting 3 primary adversaries, each outstripping Germany in select production areas, the Axis power encountered an insurmountable Allied edge in all vital armament sectors. The sole uncertainty lay in how long tactical prowess and fortification strengths might postpone the unavoidable collapse. By December 1943, the team compiled a thorough dossier for the German leadership. Detached and quantitative, its reasoning was irrefutable. It juxtaposed German capabilities against Allied yields in every key domain of weaponry: tanks, guns, planes, vehicles, vessels, munitions, petroleum, and raw steel. Each matchup revealed the same narrative. Germany lagged far behind in all, with disparities growing as hostilities dragged on. Yet the document extended further than mere tallies. It offered precise forecasts of how these imbalances would shape battlefield dynamics over the ensuing 12 to 24 months. The team determined that Allied manufacturing edges would impose escalating numerical dominance on Germany in all arenas. Its troops might secure isolated victories via adept maneuvers, superior drills, and occasionally superior gear. However, broader offensives would crumble under sheer depletion. For the Allies, every lost tank, downed plane, or wrecked lorry could be swiftly restored in weeks or months. German replacements dragged on, or never materialized. The calculus of sustained combat relentlessly tilted toward the faction able to absorb endless setbacks through boundless industry, a role Germany could not fulfill. Forecasts for 1944 onward painted a dire path. Assuming trends held, Allied ratios would hit 3:1 or more in most fighting elements by summer 1944, climbing to 5:1 or beyond in numerous areas by 1945. No amount of elite training or operational skill could endure perpetual clashes against such lopsided forces. Superiority in single armaments faded to insignificance against quintupled enemy arsenals. Even flawless triumphs in clashes would, over time, erode the Wehrmacht via relentless erosion. Troop numbers remained limited. Output limits persisted. Conquered lands dwindled, curtailing supply lines. The path led inescapably to ruin. With unassailable numerical precision, the assessment declared that military victory eluded Germany amid this industrial disparity. Far from pessimism or bias, it represented impartial scrutiny of corroborated facts. This verdict, as a measured evaluation, ought to guide pivotal choices. The experts anticipated the command would leverage it to craft viable paths forward. Conceivably, Germany might pursue negotiations from a stance of territorial leverage and negotiation leverage. Alternatively, assets could shift toward bolstering defenses to prolong hostilities pending a pact. Or the insights might steer choices on retaining vital zones versus relinquishing others. At the very least, grasping the true state could curb futile assaults that squandered vital assets without yielding lasting gains. Colonel von Riener delivered this assessment to his superiors in the High Command, fully aware of its contentious ramifications. Far from being a pessimist, his career history showcased unwavering dedication to achieving German success. He stood accused of no disloyalty. His Prussian martial background and individual integrity remained unimpeachable. As a skilled intelligence expert, he offered precise evaluations to enable informed choices by the top brass. He anticipated opposition, maybe even fury over the unpalatable findings. Instead, he faced outright dismissal of the evaluation altogether. Hitler rejected the report's key points outright, labeling them as morale-sapping defeatist rhetoric that weakened German resolve. He maintained that Teutonic determination, advanced strategies, and forthcoming innovations in technology would surmount the shortages in manpower. He referenced past instances where inferior numbers triumphed over larger armies via expertise and resolve, such as Frederick the Great's successes despite being outnumbered, Hannibal's triumphs against Rome, and Napoleon's initial conquests. He claimed that figures on Allied manufacturing were inflated for propagandistic effect, that U.S. gear was substandard and prone to breakdown in battle, that Russian factories would buckle beneath sustained Teutonic assaults, and that the UK teetered on the brink of financial collapse. Fellow generals and prominent Nazi officials echoed this stance. They highlighted ongoing German battlefield successes, the edge of elite German armaments like the Panther tank and the Mi-262 jet fighter, and the protective benefits of entrenched defenses. They contended that Wehrmacht soldiers received superior preparation, guidance, and ideological drive compared to their opponents. They were convinced that operational mastery could negate the edge in sheer numbers. Certain voices mentioned classified projects in progress, such as jet planes, enhanced U-boat submarines, and VW weapons, that would shift the overall military equation. Von Rona sought to clarify that battlefield maneuvers lost meaning against vast material dominance. The disparities in quality faded when confronting foes outnumbering them fivefold, and that elite units couldn't perform without essentials like fuel, shells, and spare parts. His points were brushed aside as pessimistic nonsense. The document was archived and disregarded. The upper echelon's refusal to heed these spy reports marked a profound misunderstanding of contemporary mechanized conflict. Doctrines from bygone eras stressed bravery, proficiency, command, and strategic genius as the core elements determining outcomes in battle. Such attributes had secured triumphs across millennia. Lone fighters with elite drills could rout hordes of lesser foes. Clever maneuvers could offset deficits in troops. Ingenious leaders could seize wins via flanking and feints. Yet World War II diverged sharply from all prior struggles. It marked the inaugural fully mechanized global war, where success hinged more on assembly lines than combat skill. The power with the greater capacity to churn out vehicles, aircraft, firearms, munitions, and provisions would prevail by sheer endurance, irrespective of field tactics. The Reich's officer class, schooled in classic Prussian warfare principles, struggled mentally to embrace this shifted paradigm. Nevertheless, a few German leaders grasped it. General Heinz Guderian, among the finest panzer tacticians and armored doctrine innovators, reflected in his post-war writings on examining seized U.S. machinery and logistics records. He determined that the fatherland battled a rival with boundless manufacturing might, rendering triumph unattainable in that context. Field Marshal Win RML arrived at parallel insights following engagements with UK and US troops across North Africa, Italy, and France. In correspondence to his spouse and formal dispatches, he observed that Teutonic operational edges proved futile against adversaries who replenished casualties on the spot, while his own divisions grappled with ever-shrinking assets. By 1944, this awareness propelled him toward involvement in the conspiracy against Hitler, stemming from the conviction that armed success was beyond reach. Albert Speer, installed as Reich Minister for Armaments and Munitions in February 1942, recognized the industrial shortfall and labored intensely to boost output. He managed notable gains via streamlined manufacturing, optimized supply distribution, and brutal use of forced workers. Under his oversight, German fabrication surged across key areas. The years 1943 and 1944 hit record highs in production volumes. Still, Speer realized his initiatives fell short. Once strikes on synthetic fuel sites commenced in May 1944, he deemed the conflict economically doomed. The assault on the Lohner synthetic oil facility on May 12, 1944, represented, in Speer's eventual recollection, the moment the industrial contest tipped decisively. He later remarked, "That date made it evident to all in German manufacturing that defeat was sealed." Yet he persisted in pressing for heightened yields. As production figures rose, he delivered addresses touting hidden armaments and total triumph, since his perspective and stance allowed for no other path. Throughout 1944, the intel experts pressed on with their assessments, despite the routine rejection or overlooking of their findings. They chronicled the Allied assault on Normandy, launched on June 6, 1944, using the identical rigorous calculations they had employed for output data. The initial assault featured around 5,000 vessels, transporting 156,000 soldiers on day one, with millions additional arriving over the following months. The organizational strategy and implementation for an endeavor of this magnitude surpassed any undertaking by Germany, even during its height of strength. The fabricated Mulberry ports, provisional structures constructed in Britain, dragged over the English Channel and pieced together near the Normandy shoreline, symbolized an engineering and manufacturing prowess beyond the reach of German capabilities. Every Mulberry harbor measured about the scale of Dover Harbor, the primary British port, yet designed solely for this incursion and viewed as disposable. Mere weeks after the beachhead, Allied troops were procuring resources via these synthetic ports at volumes sufficient to uphold the whole Wehrmacht. Stockpiles set up in Normandy held greater resources than those found across all of Germany. Aerial surveys revealed fuel reserves, munitions caches, vehicle depots, and storage facilities spanning square miles. Allied supply chains functioned on levels that rendered German logistics seem rudimentary. U.S. fighting units expended materials at paces unimaginable for German troops to maintain. Cannon barrages unleashed thousands of shells daily in support roles. Ground troops got daily replenishments of new provisions, bullets, and substitute gear. Fleet upkeep relied on portable workshops stocked with vast arrays of replacement components. Battlefield medicine featured forward operating surgeries outfitted with gear and provisions superior to typical German civilian facilities. The spy networks recorded U.S. aerial campaigns across Europe with comparable accuracy. Come late 1944, U.S. and British flyers executed thousands of missions each day, unleashing thousands of tons of explosives, suffering hundreds of planes to anti-air fire and interceptors, and swiftly offsetting those casualties. The 8th Air Force, based in Britain by itself, commanded more planes than the full Luftwaffe. One U.S. bomb squadron, akin to a German Goada, possessed more aircraft than certain German Fleer Corps. Despite Sharia's frantic pushes, German plane output topped out at roughly 39 or 87 units in 1944, prior to a steep drop-off from Allied raids, fuel deficits, and material limits. U.S. output that year hit 96,318 aircraft. The U.S. was constructing over 2 planes for each one from Germany. Moreover, American models grew ever more advanced. Extended-range escorts such as the P-51 Mustang, massive bombers including the B-17 and B-24, plus tailored planes for diverse tasks. By 1944, the heavens were Allied domain because U.S. plants could manufacture aircraft quicker than German aviators, and anti-aircraft batteries could destroy them. The Luftwaffe faded via steady erosion, hemorrhaging seasoned flyers impossible to renew, squandering irreplaceable fuel, and operating machines outnumbered 5-to-1 or worse. German jet planes like the Mi-262 embodied tech edge, yet production totaled just about 1,415 crews overall. They faced thousands of Allied piston-engine foes and failed to shift the overall war dynamic. Superior design meant nothing against sheer volume. The ultimate crushing intel emerged late in 1944, via in-depth review of Allied supply efforts in France. Following the Normandy push in late July and August, U.S. troops surged forward over France, freeing Paris and nearing the German frontier. For a short span in late August through early September, American units stretched beyond their rearward links. Transport lorries covered hundreds of miles from Normandy shores to forward positions, burning huge fuel quantities merely for transit. Such a scenario ought to have opened doors for German strikes on the stretched-thin Allies with exposed rear echelons. Rather, the U.S. merely airlifted necessities ahead. Spy dispatches noted that American units obtained goods via air in volumes surpassing what German land transport, by truck and train together, could achieve. Thousands of C-47 cargo planes ran repeated runs daily, ferrying fuel, shells, and rations to progressing forces. In the stretch of limited overland delivery, U.S. haulers airdropped thousands of tons of goods per day. This aerial resupply power by itself outstripped Germany's total transport infrastructure. The evaluation proved ruin. The United States possessed such vast transportation resources during the war that they employed sophisticated, costly, and fuel-hungry planes to ferry everyday provisions purely because air delivery outpaced any overland option. In contrast, Germany struggled mightily to provision its forward troops using just trucks and rails. The Americans, meanwhile, resorted to aviation for standard supply runs. A striking case, highlighted by intel experts, underscored this gap in stark terms. In August 1944, General George Patton's Third Army pushed ahead at breakneck speed, outstripping its terrestrial supply routes. The outfit paused briefly in early September from lack of gasoline, showing that even U.S. supply chains faced real constraints, yet the stoppage endured only a few days. Urgent airdrops provided enough petrol to restart the momentum in under 72 hours. German spies figured that the amount of goods airlifted to the Third Army over 1 week surpassed what the whole Luftwaffe might have hauled in a full month, assuming peak readiness and endless fuel supplies. But by September 1944, the Luftwaffe operated at a shadow of its prior might, hampered by fuel limits and shedding planes quicker than production could replenish them. Into late 1944, spy reports weren't merely noting U.S. dominance. They were spelling out its dire consequences for Germany's very existence. From the east, Soviet troops surged forward with huge edges in tanks, guns, and planes. Moscow's factories had bounced back from early Nazi incursions and now drew massive boosts from U.S. Lend-Lease aid, 400,000 trucks, 12,000 armored units, 11,000 aircraft, plus vast stocks of rations, gasoline, and basic materials. From the west, British and American units pressed on under total sky control and unbeatable backing and sustainment. German soldiers kept displaying sharp combat prowess, pulling off brilliant maneuvers on the battlefield and inflicting steep tolls on invaders. Still, the broader result stayed unavoidable. The sheer scale of resources sealed defeat. Germany's final big push in the west, the Ardennes assault of December 1944, laid bare the pointlessness of challenging such manufacturing might. Through tight secrecy and no radio chatter, the Wehrmacht caught foes off guard, punching holes in U.S. positions, seizing ground, and sparking chaos behind enemy lines. In those opening days, the drive gained real ground, briefly affirming Hitler's trust in grit and battlefield finesse. Yet the whole effort was hopeless from the start, not due to flawed strategy or slip-ups in carrying it out, but from basic supply arithmetic. Wehrmacht blueprints hinged outright on grabbing U.S. fuel stocks to keep the momentum. Their own transport network couldn't fuel an operation this ambitious and drawn out. Hitler openly admitted that his troops would need to plunder Allied caches as they drove west. Kampfgruppe Piper, the lead tank group, zeroed in on U.S. depots, getting as close as 1,000 feet to a key stash at Stavelot before GIs torched it. This reliance on looting foe supplies screamed of German transport frailty and all-out strategic panic. No viable campaign should bet on snatching enemy gear just to stay in the fight. That the German brass greenlit this scheme showed how far their big-picture planning had drifted from facts on the ground. Once U.S. troops shook off the shock and unleashed their gear advantage, the push crumbled in mere weeks. American outfits hit hard, at first got fresh troops and gear in days. The 101st Airborne, bottled up at Bastogne, held on thanks to aerial drops as U.S. tanks battled to break the siege. German spearheads, which had stormed ahead early, stalled from gas droughts amid relentless bombing once skies cleared, confronting fresh enemy waves that outran what Nazi leaders deemed feasible. The drive burned up Germany's final pools of working fuel, tanks, and battle-hardened men, for zero payoff in the grand scheme. Post-battle intel reviews drove home prior conclusions with harsh precision. U.S. casualties ran high in the opening clashes, roughly 19,000 dead, 47,500 injured, 23,000 taken or unaccounted for. Yet replacements flooded in over weeks. By month's end, American strength topped pre-attack levels. German tolls seemed lighter by ratio, about 12,000 slain, 38,000 hurt, 30,000 captured or missing, but those couldn't be made good. Berlin lacked any deep bench. The veterans, felled in the Ardennes, stayed lost. The tanks wrecked couldn't return from assembly lines. The petrol used up vanished forever. The clash encapsulated perfectly what intel watchers had already been chronicling. For years, German strategists had been warning of the dire situation. The tactical prowess and early gains of the Wehrmacht proved futile against foes capable of enduring massive casualties and pressing on with unflagging might. Meanwhile, German forces weakened steadily and irreversibly. Colonel Alexis von Rohe never witnessed the ultimate collapse of his nation. In July 1944, authorities detained him due to loose ties to the July 20th assassination attempt on Hitler. His role was peripheral. He was aware of the plot but refrained from direct involvement. On October 12, 1944, the Nazi authorities put him to death at Plötzensee prison. This loss deprived Germany of one of its sharpest evaluators of enemy potential, an officer who had consistently strived to deliver unbiased evaluations of adversary strengths to guide key military choices. Later examinations by scholars revealed that von Rohe had harbored secret opposition to Nazism for a long time and had intentionally fed misleading information to Hitler regarding Allied plans for D-Day, effectively turning him into an inadvertent benefit for the Allies, despite his official position in German espionage. His demise carried both personal sorrow and broader significance. The Nazi state had, in essence, silenced a bearer of harsh realities. Colonel Gallon, by contrast, made it through the conflict intact. During the war's closing stages, he coordinated efforts to safeguard the Foreign Army's East archives, duplicating records onto microfilm and concealing them amid the Bavarian mountains. Following the German capitulation, he approached U.S. troops, volunteering his dossiers and insights. The Americans, appreciating his insights into Soviet military dispositions as tensions escalated into the Cold War, brought him on board. He eventually headed up intelligence operations for West Germany, with his expertise acknowledged even by those who had once opposed him. The archived materials on Eastern forces that he protected proved invaluable to the Western powers. The narrative of German intelligence efforts in World War II uncovers enduring lessons about contemporary conflicts that still hold sway long after the events. In all-out confrontations between advanced industrial powers, manufacturing output ultimately dictates success. Valor, expertise, battlefield ingenuity, and passionate convictions all play roles, yet none can surmount a vast shortfall in resources. Through meticulous review of seized U.S. logistics records, detailed manufacturing figures, and precise numerical modeling, the Germans uncovered this reality. They conveyed these findings to their commanders time and again during 1943 and 1944. Such alerts went unheeded, as acknowledging them would have entailed conceding certain downfall. The U.S. inventory logs and transport papers that stunned German evaluators toward the end of 1943 held no hidden innovations or restricted innovations. Instead, they consisted of ordinary administrative forms, everyday tallies of goods incoming and outgoing, typical Army supply trackers. Their impact stemmed not from exposing mysteries, but from illustrating the actual state of affairs. The United States possessed the ability to manufacture, ship, and utilize war materials on a level beyond Germany's reach. This straightforward fact, verified via thorough espionage work, shaped the conflict's resolution more decisively than any clash of arms. Supply chains formed the uncelebrated yet vital backbone of armed strength. Troops lacking petroleum stay immobile. Those short on shells can't engage. Units without rations won't endure. Exceptional maneuvers avail nothing if personnel want the essentials to carry them out. By the latter part of 1943, skilled evaluators in intelligence had discerned the sheer infeasibility of a German triumph. Each following period reinforced this judgment with fresh evidence. U.S. output surged as German manufacturing leveled off or dropped amid bombardment from the Allies. The Soviets rebuilt and surpassed what Germany could achieve. Though Britain's volume was more modest overall, it supplied critical advancements and substantial aid. The Allies' edge in output widened from a 3.1 ratio in 1943 to 5.1 or more by 1945. The toll in lives from disregarding these evaluations proved immense and heartbreaking. Germany persisted in combat for about 18 months beyond the point when its own experts deemed success unattainable. Countless perished in struggles that savvy observers recognized as unable to alter the end result. Urban centers lay in ruins, civilians suffered heavy losses, the continent lay scarred, and Jewish populations faced extermination, all as reports gathered dust, outlining the inescapable arithmetic of loss. The sorrow extended beyond mere failure in battle. It lay in the foreknowledge of that failure, meticulously recorded and shared with leaders who rejected the evidence of numbers. The German specialists who examined U.S. provisioning and output data carried out their roles with skill and honesty. They compiled details from diverse, reliable channels. They scrutinized the information methodically and objectively. They offered judgments rooted in proof, free from dogma or delusion. Their efforts exemplified the ideal function of espionage organizations, to furnish precise evaluations that support sound choices. The oversight in disregarding these assessments wasn't a lapse in espionage, but a profound shortcoming in command that avoided confronting harsh realities. Evidence of Germany's impending loss was evident in seized logistics records, which demonstrated that U.S. forces were receiving far greater resources than the Wehrmacht could muster. It appeared in manufacturing reports indicating that American plants were churning out armaments in mere months at rates that outpaced German output over entire years. It showed up in naval records revealing that the United States was commissioning ships more rapidly than U-boats could destroy them. It was clear in oil metrics highlighting U.S. stockpiles in excess, while German troops conserved fuel meticulously. It emerged in iron output contrasts where Allied yields surpassed German levels by a ratio of 5-1. It was apparent in vehicle fabrication figures underscoring American transport superiority that rendered Wehrmacht maneuvers archaic by comparison. This evidence was thorough, corroborated across diverse channels, irrefutably quantifiable, and deliberately overlooked by decision-makers in positions of authority. Reflecting over 80 years later, the German evaluations from 1943 and 1944 strike as prescient yet heartbreakingly ineffective. The experts nailed every key insight. Triumph was unattainable amid such lopsided industrial might. The calculus of wearing down resources sealed the fate of loss. No level of strategic prowess could surmount that intrinsic shortfall in material. Yet, this insight altered no course, because those in charge preferred to trust in resolve, doctrine, and fateful legacy over cold calculations. The conflict dragged on to total martial downfall, to urban devastation, to countless additional fatalities, to the utter eradication of the Third Reich, to proof of capitulation, etched not in intercepted papers, but in subjugated lands and absolute submission. The insight from this chapter in history extends beyond the Second World War, offering enduring wisdom for grasping clashes among contemporary manufacturing-based states. Precise intel holds no value when rulers spurn inconvenient findings. Rigorous examination avails nothing if choices stem from belief systems rather than proof. Expertise in the field turns pointless against deliberate ignorance. German spies delivered spot-on evaluations of adversary strengths and likely results. German superiors opted for delusion instead of facts, yielding a disaster that could have been curtailed or softened by sooner embracing numerical certainties. Engagements among industrialized foes boiled down to economic rivalries settled in workshops long before fronts determined results. World War II validated this axiom beyond doubt. By 1943, Germany's evaluators grasped it fully. They recorded it with precision, they conveyed it plainly. They cautioned time and again that persisting in battle would merely amplify the scale of final ruin without altering the end. Their superiors never heeded this reality. The toll of that denial tallied in millions of casualties, razed metropolises, and the nation's wholesale obliteration. In May 1945, the seized U.S. inventory graphs and supply papers embodied a stark, game-changing truth. America outproduced, outdelivered, and oututilized armaments beyond Germany's reach. This edge wasn't slight. It was crushing, enough to ensure Teutonic downfall irrespective of combat effectiveness. Ratios of 3-to-1 in output might be countered via clever maneuvers, superior gear, or favorable ground. But 5-to-1 disparities defy reversal save for colossal blunders by the foe, which prove improbable. Allied superiority topped 5-to-1 in numerous areas and kept expanding. Ultimately, German specialists poured overtaken U.S. Logistics visuals and realized victory eluded them, not from one epiphany, but from a steady buildup of incontestable proofs across seasons. Every seized file contributed metrics, every yield datum reinforced trends, every captive questioning yielded affirmation, every informant dispatch backed prior intel. The resulting portrait was holistic, authenticated, numerically assured. Germany confronted adversaries boasting 3- to 5-fold its productive power, with the divide only broadening. No measure of battlefield acumen or morale could bridge that core imbalance in a grind of material exhaustion. The specialists recognized it, chronicled it exhaustively, and communicated it lucidly to superiors. Their misfortune lay not in flawed analysis, but in the futility of sound intel against rulers who reject the evident. The appropriated logistics files narrated a tale of unavoidable downfall, inscribed in figures impervious to debate or evasion, barring intentional delusion. They depicted U.S. plenty that defied German norms, yet stood confirmed via varied, reliable origins. They exposed a rival bearing such. The sheer scale of Allied industrial output shattered any illusions the Germans held about achieving triumph on the battlefield, rendering their aspirations utterly detached from the harsh facts of production power. By the end of 1943, the sole uncertainty was how much longer the Reich would cling to denial, despite the stark figures staring them in the face. How many additional lives would be lost until cold calculation supplanted blind fanaticism in guiding wartime choices? That grim query found its resolution on May 7, 1945, as Germany capitulated without reservation, overwhelmed not chiefly by combat prowess, but by the inexorable logic that manufacturing might seals the fate of contemporary conflicts. The intelligence experts who first pored over those seized logistics records toward the close of 1943 had grasped this fundamental insight, some 18 months prior. They had endeavored to alert their superiors, laying out the proof and demonstrating the unyielding equations. Yet their cautions fell on deaf ears, and countless souls bore the cost of that deliberate oversight. Those intercepted U.S. inventory diagrams revealed far more than mere supply chains. They exposed the utter pointlessness of battling against insurmountable productive dominance. The data conveyed a reality the Nazi high command refused to confront. In the era of mechanized conflict, assembly halls eclipse valor in importance. Output streams shape results beyond mere maneuvers, and raw numbers inevitably prevail.